All right. And we have first question, two questions, three questions. What is the proper attitude toward so-called pests, such as African snails, armyworms? What about insecticides? Now, the proper attitude is one of individual demonstration. As we all know, in the human sense, these snails, worms, roaches, all these so-called pests are nuisances, and something must be done about it. There are those who attain the spiritual answer to that, and they free themselves without the use of insecticides and without any outside help. They don't have to destroy them. Somehow or other, these things find their rightful places, because, as a matter of fact, they are not pests. They are only pests because they're not in their rightful place when they're in our homes. But they must have some rightful function, and there are those who are sufficiently spiritually endowed as to make the demonstration of being free of them. Now, whether or not it is worth a person's while to devote themselves to that particular spiritual demonstration is for each one to decide. And to my sense, if we do not make it that way, and it's going to entail a major problem, the best thing is the use of insecticides. If it can be avoided, it's a spiritual demonstration not to have to do it. But the question is whether it is worth the amount of time that some of us might have to give to that, time that we have use of in more important ways. But it is an individual demonstration, and the highest form of it is getting along without insecticides. Will the study of Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, Steiner spiritual science be a help or a hindrance to progress in the infinite way? Well, now, that depends on the point of view. If a person is searching for God, searching for truth, I think they're very foolish to stop searching until they have found it. And that means that they may well study any of the teachings that exist anywhere in the world. One thing is certain, that if behind their study is the basic desire to know truth, they will be led from one to another until they reach that one which is their own. That doesn't mean that there are any wrong ones, but it means that there is only one that is a right one as far as we are concerned. And so it is that my sense of freedom, my sense of religious freedom, my sense of taking advantage of the privilege that is given to us in the Constitution of the United States, is that as long as we are searching for truth, we should conduct that search in any way and in every way that suits us, regardless of what suits our neighbor or our family. Now, when an individual finds the particular way that is theirs, there is no further purpose in studying the others. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a very good reason sometimes for reading some of the others. For instance, I can't possibly see how anyone who had ever studied the Hindu Bhagavad Gita could ever believe that a time would come when they wouldn't find some message, some joy in reading it. Certainly I cannot believe that anyone gets so almighty spiritual that they can't find something in Lao Tzu's The Way, as inspirational reading, as truth. Certainly there is nothing more beautiful than the Persian mystics. And how one could ever be harmed by reading such magnificent poetry, I wouldn't know, and I really wouldn't believe. But to read these with the idea that one is going to mix one teaching with another, there is where the mistake comes, because that's an impossibility. Each teaching has an approach of its own. Each teaching has principles, and in every case the principles contradict the principles in the other teachings, even though there is a thread of truth that goes through all of them. And so it is that we can read, just as we can read, for instance, the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse. Oh, the inspiration and joy that there is in reading that. But don't expect to look in it and find a principle of life, because you won't. And in the same way, don't expect that the Bhagavad Gita or the Persian mystics are going to give you a way of life or a healing principle. They won't. There are very few teachings that embrace healing principles, and very few of those are correct. So one has to watch their step. But on the way up, in the search, no one should limit themselves, and everyone should follow the leading that they get from within. Certainly, if they're wise, and they are wise if they're being spiritually guided, when they find the one that meets their particular need, they should stay with that one, because otherwise they leave themselves open to confusion. And again, that doesn't mean we should shut ourselves off from good spiritual literature, Bibles of the world, and so forth and so on. But it does mean this: when we have found the teaching that is ours, let's stay with it. If it ever fails us, then it'll be time to go on the search again to find another. But unless it does, let us stick to that one that has met our need and not confuse ourselves with other approaches. Now, there are some religious teachings which are actually profane. They're actually fraudulent. But that is no reason not to read them if you're led to them. If you are being divinely guided, you'll see what's right in it or what's wrong in it, and you'll quickly drop it. Certainly the Master says, by their fruits ye shall know them. And if you stay with the teaching for a while and it doesn't give you fruitage, if it doesn't give you some hope inside that this is the way, why stay with it? And so it is, you are led even to go through the wrong ones, and in time throw them aside. Always remember this: what would you do if you were the librarian of some large library? Or what would you do if you owned a bookstore? Would you sit down and try to judge or to censor the reading matter of those who came into your library or your bookstore? No, you might recommend, but you wouldn't censor. And if somebody wanted the wrong thing, they would have to have it. And I say that to our students. Those who are our students, those who have found that the infinite way is their way, I'm certainly willing, not only that they read anything they like, but if they ask my advice, I'll tell them very honestly what I think is wrong. But otherwise I won't, because I recognize everybody's right to do what they want. Only don't ask for my opinion unless you're willing to take it, because I'll give it to you. Now, and so the answer is no. These other teachings cannot help, except that they may be stepping stones but certainly they cannot harm if you're a person of enough intelligence to read and read objectively and know what's right when you read it, know what's wrong, and learn to cast out what is wrong. Let none of us try to take from this world the freedom to read what anyone likes. On the other hand, let none of us be afraid to truthfully give our opinion if someone honestly and sincerely wants it. You have said that our bodies are ours but not us. You've likened them to an automobile. I understand that the natural sensations of hunger and thirst are not in our bodies but in the universal belief. Should our minds, and therefore our bodies, be as free from these so-called natural feelings for instance, probably, as an automobile? If not, what place have these in our life? How do we deal with them? No, absolutely, you cannot rule out of you a hunger for food or a desire for water. You cannot rule out of you entirely the sensations of pain, although there are ways to develop such a high consciousness that even if you had pain, you wouldn't know it. But ordinarily speaking, and for the ordinary student, the average student, even for the advanced student, unless they have taken pains to develop that faculty, you are going to have hunger and you're going to have thirst, and you're going to require some exercise, you're going to require proper food, you're going to require bathing, and the natural affections must be fed. You're not supposed to rule those out. But when the Spirit touches us, all of those things are under control. Then you can say, man shall not live by bread alone, but that doesn't mean that man won't eat some food. Man isn't living by water, but that doesn't mean that he won't take some water into his system. Man doesn't live by taking baths or exercises, but that doesn't say that in our present development we won't bathe and we won't take exercise. But those things are incidental to our lives. They are not important. And therefore, the appetites are always under control. And one way that you'll notice the effect is this. If you are acquainted with people who have been for some time on the metaphysical path, such as Christian Science, unity, or the infinite way, you will find that alcohol drops away from them entirely. Smoking drops away from them entirely. And as a rule, overeating, overindulgence in foods. And that is without any special treatment. That is just a normal, natural happening, that the desire for alcohol, the desire for smoking, the desire for overindulgence in any way drops away. Also, the desire for, shall we call it, overindulgence in amusements, whether it's the overindulgence in theater or the overindulgence in dancing or the overindulgence in card playing or the overindulgence in sex relations, that drops away. And that doesn't mean that a person may not enjoy an occasional good show or good music. It doesn't mean that they will not occasionally enjoy a good television show or a good moving picture show, nor does it mean that they will not be happy in their married life if they are happily married. But it does mean this, that when the Spirit touches you, it absolutely rules out overindulgence in the senses. And the proof of that I have seen in all of these 27 years in the people with whom I've mingled in Christian Science and in unity and in the infinite way. Very seldom do you find anyone that still partakes of alcohol. I don't mean that, more especially in Europe, that they may not take a glass of wine or a glass of beer, but that is not the indulgence in alcohol. There again, that is no different than our indulgence in an ice cream soda or a Coca-Cola. But the use of alcohol as a stimulant, the use of tobacco as a stimulant, these things drop away. The desire for gambling drops away. Can you see the reason for it? Gambling has behind it the desire to gain and, let's say, easy gain. But if one has been touched by the Spirit, what do they want that the other fellow has got? Certainly not his money. Certainly not without giving something in exchange for it. And so there's no longer an appetite for gambling, because the product of gambling, which is money, is no longer needed except that which comes in our normal, natural way. And so these things have a rightful place in our experience at our present level of development, but by reaching Spirit, or when Spirit touches us, be assured of this, that all of the human senses are under control. Is that clear? We are not ascetics in the sense that we give up all of what the world calls normalcy. Now, it's wonderful how this Bible answers questions. In the infinite way, you know that prayer is far different than the ordinary concept of prayer, in that, to begin with, it embodies nothing in the way of petition at all, and very little in the way of human thoughts or words. In preparing for prayer, it is possible that certain passages of Scripture or our truth reading will come to our thought and prepare us, give us an atmosphere in which to rest for the prayer itself. But prayer does not consist merely of words, thoughts, or silences, but rather prayer is a way of life, and prayer is an activity. And here's what I find in Isaiah. I'll start with 58. The Hebrews are praying and fasting, but not living the life of spiritual practice. And here's what they're told. And the heading of this is chapter 58 of Isaiah, hypocritical fasts reproved, promises to godliness and to a due observance of the Sabbath. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinance of justice. They take delight in approaching to God. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with a fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high. Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast, and an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen? to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh? Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily. Thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of the Lord shall be thy rear reward. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity, and if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. The Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. You see, there is where even metaphysicians have fooled themselves, that when they think or declare or read their prayers or affirmations or treatments, they believe that there will be an answer from God. And there is no answer from God except in our fulfillment of the laws of God. It is not enough to sit back here and desire that we be healed. It is not sufficient that we sit back here and desire that the Lord God come down out of his holy temple and amuse us. And it isn't going to happen. As we open ourselves to the vision and the realization of God, we have to act as though we were children of God and put into operation the laws of God. Then do we find that even without words and without thoughts, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Those are not prayers. Those are commands. When those commands are obeyed, the fulfillment takes place in us. Prayer is an activity. It is not the activity of the mind. It is the activity of the soul and the mind and the body. All three have to work together in fulfilling the commandments. What are the 10 commandments? Well, the Hebrews, or what are the commandments? The Hebrews give us 10. The Master gives us 2. You don't have to bother about the other 8. Fulfill those 2, and the 10 are automatically fulfilled, but so are 10 more and 10 more and 10 more. Because prayer is a fulfilling of certain teachings, certain commandments, certain rights. Now, to sit back all day and fast and pray, and I'm thinking right now of the fast day of the Hebrews. As you know, they have a Day of Atonement. And on that day, they are supposed to fast from sundown to sundown. The Reformed ones have changed God's laws, and they're satisfied if you do it from noon until night. God hasn't said anything about changing it, but we have. Just as the Pope has recently excused some of the people from eating fish on Friday. The Lord hasn't said much about it, but the Pope has. So that'll be good enough. Now, the Hebrew fasts from sundown to sundown. And as a matter of fact, it's a mighty good idea. More especially if it's done in the way that is required in the old Orthodox temple, and that is that one go to temple in the morning and stay there all day, fasting, praying, cogitating, asking forgiveness of sins. And we're told that by the time you leave the temple in the evening, you have been forgiven all of your sins, and now you've got a clean slate. Yes, but not a clean slate to go out tomorrow and start all over again. But that's the way it's understood. Oh yes, we are forgiven today. Now tomorrow we go right back to our business, we go right back to our false advertising, we go right back to our cheating, so forth and so on, but because there'll be a Day of Atonement next year, and if we live to it, we'll be forgiven. That may not be said, but certainly that is what is behind it all, just like all confession. Tomorrow we start off doing the same thing we did before we confessed. Now, that isn't really prayer, that isn't atonement, and that isn't fasting. But if on a particular day, a certain day, you and I come to the realization that our lives have not been up to the highest expression of even that which we've known, and that we'd like to start out with a higher basis, then we can come to a day of fasting or a day of prayer, or it can be a day of feasting, as long as, within there is the realization, I have come to the end of an era. I have come to the end of an episode. I've come to the end of this particular place in my life, and I'm starting afresh. But I always remember this, that the Master did say that forgiveness is 70 times 7. So we have the right to forgive ourselves and to expect that in that we are forgiven. We have fasted, we have repented, we are now abstaining from those old ways, and now we're starting out anew. And then we can expect that we have in that day had our Day of Atonement and been forgiven. Much more is that true if at the same time we call to our minds this, that there are 2 commandments, and they are not quotations, they are commandments meant to be obeyed. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul. Well, of course, everyone cannot love God in the same way, because loving God is subject to interpretation. But regardless of the interpretation, if one is loving God supremely, according to their particular highest light, they are in obedience to the commandment. But then comes the second. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And here's the difficult one first, because there is the need to determine who is my neighbor. And until one has come to the realization that man and beast, animal and insect, is my neighbor, we have not arrived at the full meaning of it. And then comes that point of living up to our highest sense of right in that direction. Now then, he's made it very clear in here that fasting, praying, afflicting our soul, asceticism, is nothing if it's done for any other reason than one. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring to the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh, then shall thy light. There is loving thy neighbor as thyself. There is praying. There is living the life of prayer. Now you see why I say that healing work in the infinite way is a facet of it. But the major function of the infinite way is to reveal the meaning of Scripture, of a spiritual way of life, and then help those who desire it to attain it, for they cannot attain it of their own accord, because if they have only their human mind and human body and human will, they will not attain it. Somebody must introduce in them the spiritual activity of the Christ that will enable them to function. For no man by his own spirit can attain. No man by his own power can attain. There must be the activity of a spiritual awareness within. And that is brought to us either by our teachers, our practitioners, our books, or whatever it is that lifts us in consciousness to the point of inner receptivity to the Christ. Now, going to church and doing church work, having centers and doing center work, that's all fine, if in conjunction with it our individual lives are beginning to bear witness to our highest sense of right. No one will expect of you, and I'm sure no one will expect of me, the absolute perfection of the completed Christ, because it isn't within our power to achieve that. But let us only be in agreement that that is our goal, and that our lives each day attest to our highest ability at that moment, because with every flight of our wings, the wings get stronger. Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people, but the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles, that's those in outer darkness, shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Lift up thine eyes round about and see. All they gather themselves together. They come to see. Thy sons shall come from far, and thy daughters shall be nursed at thy side. Then thou shalt see and flow together, and thine heart shall fear and be enlarged, because the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto thee. The forces of the Gentiles shall come unto thee. The multitude of camels shall cover thee. The dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, all they from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and incense, and they shall show forth the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together unto thee, and the rams of Nebaioth shall minister unto thee. They shall come up with acceptance on mine altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. The sons of strangers shall build up thy walls, and their kings shall minister unto thee. For in my wrath I smote thee, but in my favor have I had mercy on thee. Therefore thy gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut by day or night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought. For the nation and kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish. Yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted. The glory of Lebanon shall come unto thee, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. The sons also of them that afflicted thee shall come bending unto thee, and all they that despise thee shall bow themselves down at the soles of thy feet, and they shall call thee the city of the Lord, the Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Whereas thou hast been forsaken and hated, so that no man went through thee, I will make thee an eternal excellency, a joy of many generations. Violence shall no more be heard in thy land, wasting nor destruction within thy borders, but thou shalt call thy walls salvation, and thy gates praise. The sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee. But the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. Thy sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself. For the Lord shall be thine everlasting light, and the days of thy mourning shall be ended. Thy people also shall be righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. In the first part of that, you see the fulfillment of the 58th. Live prayer. Put into action the commandment of love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, which in our teaching means acknowledge God as the infinite, the invisible, creative principle of the universe. Acknowledge that God alone is the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of life, and that to God there is no opposite, no opposition, and for that reason, in our practical lives, we need no power. That is why in being confronted with any problem, whether your own or another's, you can close your eyes and have no resistance in your mind, no desire to refute, to deny, to overcome, to rise above, or to destroy. Just that calm peace, because you have acknowledged God as the only creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle, and you know there is no other power, so you need not invoke any power for any purpose. Therefore, your meditation will settle back into peace. When you are in meditation and you are not struggling with a problem, you are not trying to overcome it or destroy it or rise above it. If necessary, you're just sitting there looking right at it, not even needing a God, since you know that already God is. Then you are loving the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, because you're giving it utter supremacy and not acknowledging that there is something you want it to do something to. The highest form of loving the Lord thy God with all thy heart is in acknowledging that there are no other powers, and not even turning to God for power, since there's nothing to use God for or for God to do anything to. Then you have your second commandment. And here you have seen that unless you are meeting the need of your brother at his level of consciousness, you are neglecting part of that loving of thy neighbor. For your neighbors are not all metaphysicians. It is true that to your metaphysical, spiritual brother and sister, you need not lend money. You need not finance them. You need not take pity on them. You need not support them, because the greatest thing that you have of value to them in the way of love is Look, brother and sister, let us not rely on human mode or means. Let us stand fast in spiritual demonstration and see what the Lord thy God hath for thee. And that's the highest form of loving our neighbor that we can give to our metaphysical and spiritual brother and sister. But let us remember this, that we have other neighbors. We have neighbors who need in this community a hospital. Let's help to give it to them. We have neighbors who still need certain schools. We have neighbors here who need fireworks on the 4th of July. We have neighbors here who need food kitchens, some who need clothing. Let us be a neighbor on their level. And that doesn't mean that we acknowledge that that's absolutely necessary. We only acknowledge that it's necessary at their level of consciousness, and they are our neighbor too. And we can't say to them, you starve to death until you get our understanding. No, we can't do that. The Master fed the Hebrews, he fed the multitudes, and he healed them, and he did not say to them, I won't help you until you're as spiritual as I am. But he fed them at their level of consciousness, and so do we. That is loving our neighbor too. And so it is that in any way and in every way, God leads and guides and directs us to love our neighbor. We have to put into action our prayers. Prayers are not words or thoughts. Words and thoughts may be a part of prayer to a certain point, but beyond that point, prayer is action. And our prayers are testified to by the degree of our obedience to those two commandments. And of course, such other instructions as we may receive from the Master. For as we touch this spiritual path, we are given missions to perform, each one at the level of our development. It is given to some to do church work. It is given to some to do organizational religious work. It is given to some to do some of the tasks in infinite way work. It is given to others to get busy with the healing and the recordings and the teachings. It is given to others to see that their part of their functions, but each one is instructed by the Father what they are to do and when and to what extent, and they are given the ability to do it. But whether it's in the infinite way or whether it's out, the same law applies. As each person reaches certain levels of spiritual consciousness, they are given certain spiritual tasks to do, even on what we call this human plane. And it behooves us to do those things, or, like the fig tree, to be rendered entirely valueless and void. Well, prayer. See now, in examining yourself, where you may have relied on the right words and the right thoughts and not followed it up by action. See where, in one way or another, you have sat back in the temple and done all the worshiping in the temple, and then went out and lived your normal, regular human life the next day, which is not indicative of prayer, because prayer results in a change of consciousness. There is no prayer where there is no resultant change of consciousness. There is some kind of an attempt at prayer. There may be some kind of a pseudo-prayer. There may be some kind of a false concept of prayer. But prayer itself results in a change of consciousness. If an individual, totally devoid of any concept of God or any idea of true religion, were in this moment to have a feeling that they must find God, everything they did from that moment on, whether they read a book or prayed or went to a temple or whether they stood on their head and did yogi exercises, all of that would be a prayer if it was done with the intent of finding God. And if with that intent the prayers were carried on the human level, they would lead to a change of consciousness which would lead in its turn to a changed life. That we know without question. All right, now let us have a meditation. And our meditation begins with, show me, Father, what I am to do. Lead me in thy way. Heretofore you have asked for nothing, but now ask anything in my name, and it will be so unto you. Acquaint now thyself with him, and be at peace. That, of course, must be the starting point of our entire day. From the moment we open our eyes in the morning, that I may acquaint myself with thee, that I may meet thee face to face, that I may experience thee. And that, in the background of our thought, is the tenor of our thought from morning to night, and night to morning. Oh, that I might know thee. I thirst after thee. I hunger after thee. Not for any purpose. To know thee aright is life eternal. To know God aright is life eternal. That's the purpose. To know thee aright. And that brings us to the end of that 60th chapter of Isaiah, in which you will find the fulfillment of the message of the infinite way. The sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee. But the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. The basis of the entire message of the infinite way is that when we no longer are dependent on corporeal effect, when we no longer feel that person or thing is the essential of our life, but that our demonstration is to be God, then it is that God appears as our light by day, sunlight by day, bright light, and God appears as our moonlight by night. God appears as our food and our clothing, our raiment, our housing, our companionships. But it isn't thing, it isn't a moon, and it isn't a sun, and it isn't a person. It's God itself appearing as. That's the heart and the soul of the infinite way. You do not need a sun, and you do not need a moon, and you do not need an earth to stand upon. You do not need a bomb-proof shelter. You do not need an atomic bomb. You do not need a law court. You do not need a person. One thing alone is needed: the realization of God. Then God becomes the light of our day and the light of our night. God becomes the food we eat. God becomes our companionships. And our companionships are always beautiful, always complete, always perfect, never beginning with love and ending with hate, never beginning with understanding and ending with misunderstanding. For how can God change? Humans can, but not God. Yes, the sun can give light, but the sun can also burn, but not God. There's no good and evil in God. And so it is that once we realize that God is our only demonstration, let me demonstrate where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Where the realization of God's presence is, there is health, harmony, wholeness, eternality, immortality, abundance, and all these things that people are out demonstrating as things. And I have told you that in the first chapter of Genesis, there were crops before there was seed put in the ground. There was light before there was a sun. And here Isaiah explains it to you, that when God is your glory, God is your light, and you have no need of sun or moon. Many, many times I've heard Alan Boone say, what are people going to do when there's no world left to stand on? You know, they're going to collapse if they haven't found that they live and move and have their being in God. They won't need a world to stand on. They'll find whether they're so-called living or so-called dead, they'll still be living and moving and having their being in God. I think he did all right by us tonight. I won't quarrel with him. Thank you.